If you like what you're listening to, you can support me on Patreon, patreon.com/mtgbooks. Chapter 9. Victims. The operation began at sunrise. It was not going well. It should have taken a few hours to call hostages from the leading families of the Dahl, the Vec, and the Core, but as Dorian Ildal stood on a broken wall in the ruined city quarter, studying his timepiece, he saw the roundup was entering its 8th hour. It would take longer still to get things recorded properly. Grevin descended on the crater with 2,000 soldiers and as many Mogs. He had a list of names drawn up by Dorian and his fellow courtiers, and he had to go house to house to find the people he wanted. Quotas called for no less than 2,000 hostages from each group. Word quickly spread about the roundup, and finding the listed hostages got harder and harder. There were scuffles, but no real fighting. Most of the hostages were quietly anxious or stubbornly sullen, but few offered open resistance. Lines of captives, sorted by family and race, marched 4 abreast out of the city of traitors under the stronghold to the ruins beyond. Soldiers lined the way with arms ported.
"If I put whips in the hands of my Mogs, the lines would move faster,"
Grevin mused. Dorian was horrified.
"You can't do that. Mogs whipping the Evankar subjects, they'll riot. They'll rebel." "Easy, old man," Grevin said. "This job's about stopping a rebellion, not starting one. Just thinking like a soldier."
Thinking like a savage, Dorian thought. So the Chamberlain stood on a tumbled-down wall with a trio of scribes below him, totting up the peoples as they trudged by. Each list was checked against Grevin's master list to make certain the exact number from each group was represented. In an operation like this, Dorian stressed, no one race should be seen as being favored by the authorities. The resentment thus caused would undo the salutary lesson of taking hostages in the first place. Grevin turned away from surveying the operation.
"What's the count?"
Dorian slapped his secretaries on the shoulder in turn. 1,344 of the Dahl, said the first. 1,289 of the Vec, said the second. 875 of the Core, added the third.
"Why so few Core?"
"They're more elusive," Dorian said. "I've had reports that Core from outside the stronghold have not been taken at all."
"The Fishers of Life?"
The Chamberlain consulted a scroll. Yes, that's the clan. How did you know?" Grevin didn't answer. Instead, he asked,
"Have the holding areas been prepared?"
"Such as they are, if we have to hold these people more than a few days, they'll not stand for the conditions here."
"They'll stand for what they're told to stand for,"
Grevin snapped. He signaled his escort to form up. He wanted to see the holding area himself. At the far edge of the ruins, near the city moat, 3 large squares had been cleared by Mog laborers. Rough walls made from debris of fallen houses were piled up to create crude stockades. Each stockade had a single entrance. Hostages were marched into the stockades according to their race. Some hours passed and the lines began to thin. Eventually, Dorian and his secretaries appeared with the soldiers who'd been driving the lines forward. The Chamberlain looked happy. Grevin turned his eyes to Dorian.
"What's the final count?"
"We made up the Core tally. A whole band of them arrived at the last minute," Dorian said under his breath. "The quota's within 20 persons of being perfect."
"Where are the Core?"
There, at the end of the line. They turned themselves in."
"What?"
Dorian shrugged. "They appeared on their own, behind the escort detachment. One of them spoke to me and asked to be added to the tally." Grevin grasped Dorian's soft arm in a painful grip.
The core you spoke to, was his name Fura? The Chamberlain grunted in pain. Dreadlord, you're hurting me. What was the core leader's name? Fura sounds right, or Furda, some such uncouth name. Grevin released Dorian with a shove and waded through the ranks of guards. In front of them were the last hostages, and in this case over 100 core in identical gray leather outfits. Though Grevin had lived his entire life on Rath with both Dahl and Core as neighbors, he'd never seen an entire clan look so identical. Startled, Grevin called out, Fura! Fura! I want to speak to you! In one motion, 100+ core turned and looked back at Grevin. They were all Fura. The warrior shook his head. Did you see that? Grevin asked a nearby soldier. See what, Dreadlord? Nothing. Never mind. The night of the hub wind, Belby made her first inspection of the Flowstone factory. She did this alone, or rather with 6 Mogs to carry the new machinery sent with her from Phyrexia. The court advisors she quickly dismissed as useless sycophants. Grevin and Dorian were busy rounding up thousands of hostages, and Urtai was nowhere to be found. The last fact annoyed her in some ill-defined way. Belby found herself wanting Urtai's company, and not having what she wanted made her feel thwarted. She soon forgot about Urtai, Grevin, hostages, and everything else once she was deep in the Flowstone works. Unlike those parts of the Citadel adapted for habitation, the factory was the most Phyrexian part of the stronghold, and in Belby's short life, Phyrexia meant home. The structure of the factory was purely organismic. The adamantine frames of the building were like bones, and the cladding was applied like muscle in the skin over the factory's skeleton. The entire fortress cantilevered out from the side of the stronghold cone and was studded with flues, exhaust ports, and enormous conduits channeling liquid flowstone outside the crater. Over the years, residue from the great works secreted outside like scar tissue, blunting the lines of the severe architecture. By the time Belby arrived, the Citadel was like a vast wasp's nest growing organically and infested with thousands of poisonous inhabitants. In the dome's center control atop the factory, Belby stood in rapt fascination at the great cauldron at the heart of the Citadel. Here, lava, the raw material of flowstone, met the energy beam sizzling down from the hub. Atoms disintegrated in the energy stream, were whirled about at extreme velocities, and reformed into programmable nanomachines. Flowstone was also wonderful, magnificent, and efficient. Moggs lolled on the floor behind her, taking a breather while Belby was lost in admiration of the factory. She recovered her sense of purpose and ordered them to bring up the nanomachine conversion accelerator. This was a globe, 18 inches in diameter, whose outer skin was encrusted with extruded tubing, wires, and output jacks. It was a self-aware device, capable of accepting verbal orders and implementing them throughout the factory. Phyrexian technicians had designed the conversion accelerator to optimize production of flowstone. As things stood, the factory ran at one speed all the time. Actual output varied, however, according to the amount of energy from the hub, the quality and the amount of lava, and the purity of the raw materials used. The conversion accelerator would harmonize these elements so as to produce more flowstone when conditions warranted, and expend less energy when conditions were unfavorable. Overall production efficiency was expected to increase by almost 27%. The Moggs maneuvered the heavy module into place. Belby made the master power connections, and the accelerator came to life. Implement final installation, she commanded.
Understood.
The device extended sharp-edged feelers to the control console. The tubes punched through the flowstone skin. Thin yellow oil wept from the incisions, but they quickly healed.
Connection complete,
said the accelerator.
Input flow nominal. Output flow at 117%.
Reduce output to 100%.
That is not maximum,
countered the machine. This is a test of your verbal command structure. Reduce to 100%. The accelerator vibrated slightly on its new mountings. Lights all over the factory dimmed, brightened, then settled down. The constant drone of the molecular whirlpool in the factory core declined half an octave.
Output flow 100%.
The accelerator announced. Belby adjusted some of the external controls on the module. One of them was the voice command recognition circuit. Who am I?
Emissary from Central Control. Unit number 338-551-732.
Stop. You are correct. Do you acknowledge my authority?
Command authority is authentic.
Are there any default authorities? She asked, curious.
The Evankar of Rath.
Any others?
No others.
Very good. Seal command authority to my voice and the Evankars. The unit clicked loudly and said,
Sealed.
One task done, another major task remained. The Moggs had a second carton to deliver. In her belt pouch, she had the control unit for a transplanar portal, the only portable device of its kind on Rath. The second carton in her baggage was a portal generator, a special device that could open a portal to any plane in the multiverse. The portal, if opened, would need space. It also needed to be out of the way. Where to install it? Belby ran through the complex floor plan of the Citadel in her head. There was a place. She called the Moggs. Installation of the accelerator had taken so long, the Moggs had fallen asleep leaning on the second carton. She shouted at them, and they twitched awake. She took a catwalk that circled the mighty central crucible. This close to the factory, static from the tremendous energy input could be felt through the walls of the furnace. The Moggs didn't like it one bit and slunk along, scratching their tingling skin on every available protrusion. Belby found the prickly sensation stimulating, not unlike her experience with Volrath's bath. When she reached the place she'd chosen, she checked carefully to be sure she was not observed. Location of her portal equipment had to be secret. There were people in the palace who would kill for a chance to leave Rath. Belby had explicit orders from her masters not to allow anyone access to her portal. An hour later, the portal device was deposited in a seldom visited part of the Citadel. Belby made a mental note to ask Grevin to execute the Moggs who helped her install the machinery as a standard security precaution. Belby had minimal need for sleep. The glistening oil in her veins kept her active long after ordinary beings craved rest. At daybreak, she descended to the lower airship dock to see what progress was being made on Predator. She found the hull had been reassembled and new deck fittings were being installed. All that remained after that was the tricky job of installing the engine and rigging. She spotted Grevin Vex foreman and asked him where his master was.
I haven't seen him since yesterday, Excellency, said the Vec. He left with Lord Dorian, and I haven't seen either of them since. Thank you. Excellency, when you find Lord Grevin, ask him please to come back soon as he can. We don't dare set the engines in place without him.
Belby promised to pass the word to Grevin. On her way out of the ship's dock, a guard spotted her.
If you're looking for Lord Grevin, Excellency, you'll find him in the ruins beyond the City of Traitors.
She searched her implanted memory and found she didn't know this place.
Where is that?
Belby asked. The guard stepped to the edge of the docking platform and pointed to the floor of the crater.
See the lights down there, Excellency? That's the City of Traitors. If you head that way,
he pointed to the far side of the crater in the direction of the Mogg Warrens. There's a lot of fallen down buildings. That's where you'll find Commander Grevin. Belby leaned on the railing. A warm updraft, smelling of molten rock and ozone, ruffled her hair and the tight sleeves of her teal gown.
What's Grevin doing down there?
Haven't you heard, Excellency? That's where he's taken the hostages from the City of Traitors. Belby had a sudden urge to descend to the ruins and observe the operation for herself. Without the airship, it was a long journey to the crater floor. Belby dismissed the guard and stood by the rail, gazing down at the haze-shrouded area, pondering how best to get there.
Your Excellency?
The second word was enunciated with ironic precision. There was Urza, leaning casually on one of the inverted buttresses supporting the airship dock. Something was different. It wasn't just his appearance, though he had finally given up his tattered robes and donned Rathy garb. High-collar doublet, knee breeches, and ankle-high flesh-stone boots, all in different shades of gray. There was something else about him, less tangible than a change of wardrobe. Urza's presence was different.
Someone needs to speak to the tailors in this place, he said. They have no sense of color at all. But I did want to be presentable, since you called me.
I didn't call you. You were thinking about me. I came to find you.
I had work to do, she said, pretending not to care, in the factory.
Then I'm glad I missed it. Nothing as boring as machinery. He came to the rail and looked down on the city.
Awful place,
he remarked. He glanced upward at the vast overhanging bulk of the Citadel. It's like living in a well with a boulder balanced over your head.
I want to go down there, she said, pointing to the distant ruins.
Urza asked why. She reminded him of his hostage idea.
Grevin and Dorian are down there now, gathering them.
Urza's face darkened.
I'm sorry I suggested it. I don't know how such an idea came into my head.
He shrugged.
Of course, it's a very good idea from a certain point of view, like all my ideas, but no good will come of it. I want to go there,
Belby repeated. Urza took hold of her hand. She made a mild attempt to free herself, but he held on.
Let me take you there, Excellency.
She stopped struggling.
You don't have to call me that.
Don't I?
No. Very well. Belby, I can get you down there faster than an airship or any silly flowbot crane. How? He let go of her hand, turned, and walked about 6 feet away. He sat down on the gritty floor, folding his legs in front of him. Urtai pressed his palms together and closed his eyes. Visualization, he said softly, is the most important part of spellcasting. Belby watched him closely. Urtai trembled. His fingers went white from the pressure, and most of the color drained from his face. The collar of his new doublet wilted from perspiration. Something disturbed the air behind her. Belby turned and saw a large, vague shape with flapping wings hovering a few yards from the platform. Urtai's expression grew more strained, and the outline of the flapping object grew more distinct. Air itself seemed to be congealing to form the creature, which gradually assumed the form of a great predatory bird. "What is it?" she asked, impressed. Urtai did not answer. He opened his eyes and stiffly unbent his legs. His brow was etched with deep furrows as he fiercely maintained his concentration even with the distractions of open eyes and movement. He extended a hand toward the phantom bird, drew it back, and closed out outstretched fingers into a fist. The giant bird flew into the dock, its wings and head passing through the solid structure of the platform without resistance. Yet, when it reached Urtai, extended a taloned claw and grasped him around the waist. He repeated the clasping gesture, and Spectral Falcon took hold of Belby's waist as well. "What's this?" she protested, trying to open the bird's talons. Though solidly in the creature's grip, her efforts to repel the bird met no solid flesh at all. It was most disturbing, being lifted by visible yet untouchable claws. "Stop it," she said. "I'll use the Citadel egress. It'll only take a few hours to go down there." Before she could finish the sentence, the Spirit Falcon rocketed away from the airship dock. Belby, to her consternation, saw she was dangling beneath the translucent creation, hundreds of feet in the air. Some primitive part of her was thrilled with terror, an emotion she was learning on Rath, but her good sense told her interrupting Urtai's mental focus would be disastrous for them both. The Falcon descended in a rapid spiral through the hot, lava-scented air. They circled quite close to the upward-flowing column of lava. Between the giant falcon claw clamped around Belby's waist and the stifling heat of the lava, it was hard to breathe. Fortunately, the Falcon's next loop took them far away from the lava flow, well out over the city of traders. As they coursed through the thin clouds, Belby started to enjoy the experience. The sweep, the feeling of speed and power flying conferred, was intoxicating. She looked down on the city below, marveling at the gridwork of the streets and houses. It was some minutes before she realized the streets and squares were devoid of activity. Not a single Vec or core could be seen. Urtai started to choke loudly. His face had gone ghastly white, and blood was dripping from both nostrils. He let out a racking cough, and to her horror, Belby felt the falcon's claw thin and slip. They were 200 feet above the city. If she fell from this height, not even her metal skeleton would save her, and Urtai would surely die. They descended too rapidly as the falcon's wings faded in and out of existence. At 50 feet, rooftops rushed by, and chimneys became serious hazards. Urtai was hanging limply in the falcon's evanescent grip, blood staining the front of his new clothes. 30 feet, Belby looked up. The body and wings of the falcon were almost gone. Just the faintest outline was left. Abruptly, the magical creature vanished. Belby lunged for Urtai. She caught him, twisted in midair until her feet were down, and braced for impact. They hit the roof of an empty house, broke through, hit the floor of the second story, and went through that as well. When Belby hit the ground, her legs jackknifed hard, but the Phyrexian alloy took the stress. Her augmented nerves singled massive pain, then shut down. Over and over they rolled in the dust and debris of the abandoned dwelling, coming to a stop against an outside wall. Belby rose from the rubbish. Her ill-used legs quivered from the strain. Already her implanted healing systems were kicking in, repairing torn muscles and ligaments, and liberally dosing her nervous system with pain suppressants. She turned Urtai over. His color was already coming back, and his nose had stopped bleeding. Belby had taken the full force of the fall for him. "Ah!" he said, clasping his head. "What a headache! What happened? Your magical bird failed? My spell fail? Impossible!" His conviction, strongly spoken, made his head throb unmercifully. "It dropped us. If I hadn't caught you, you'd be dead now." The dim interior of the ruined house, the drying blood on his face and neck, and Belby's unflinching manner must have convinced Urtai that she was telling the truth. "The Spirit Falcon is a taxing spell to perform, but I've never heard of it failing like this," he said, genuinely puzzled. It began to fade just after a few minutes. He scratched his rusty blonde head. "There must be something interfering with the flow of magical energy. Perhaps it's your healing treatment. The native energies of Rath must be very different from those of your home world. Belby helped him stand. Good thing we fell in an empty house, he said quietly. For reasons she did not entirely understand, Belby leaned forward and pressed her lips to Urtai's. He was so startled by this unexpected action he failed to respond in kind. Belby drew back, expressionless. Did I do it incorrectly? I don't know, he said. I wasn't prepared. Prepare yourself, then, she said. It may happen again. In awkward silence, they made their way out of the ruined house. The unpaved street was covered with sickly yellow moss and gray lichen and clogged with blocks, fallen pediments, bricks, and shards of pottery. Belby and Urtai picked their way through the ruins to the next street. This wide path was clear of debris, and the thick dust had been stirred recently by a large crowd of people. The hostages came this way, Belby said. Must be hundreds of them. Thousands. Lord Greven is not one for half measures. They walked down the broad, empty road. Ruddy light from the rising column of lava painted the ruins in shades of pink. Urtai looked at Belby. May I ask you a question? She put her arms behind her head and stretched her healing limbs. Of course. Do you ever ask yourself if you're on the right side or not? She looked at her feet. Of the road? No. In this struggle? No. Why not? The right side is the side that succeeds, she said simply. This is the basic truth my masters taught me. They could be wrong. It is possible, but not likely. Time will tell. I used to think I knew right from wrong, Urtai said. That was before I began my advanced studies in magic. Then I learned that power is power regardless of its origin. Any species can be used to kill or cure, and if that's so, how can any of it be good or evil? It simply is. I think people are like that too. We simply are. I will ask you a question, she said. He agreed. Do you regret coming here? Do you miss your comrades on Weatherlight? He stopped, feet stirring little gouts of fine dust. They left me here, Urtai said. I was angry at them for that. Now, in an odd way, I think they did me a favor. Amid the ruins, the sanguinary light of the lava column, and the still, humid air at the bottom of the crater, Belby had a strange new experience. A more worldly woman could have told her that she was feeling affection for the first time. As it was, she had to figure it out for herself. The hostages filled out the stockades with resignation. Each family staked out a place in the dusty enclosures and waited for word they could go home again. Soldiers stood atop the low rubble walls, eyeing their quiescent charges. Belby and Urtai arrived to find Greven seated on a broken monolith. Dorian Ildal was with him, a picnic lunch spread out on a cloth between them. When they saw Belby approaching, both men rose and bowed. Greetings, Excellency. You're looking well today. Why didn't you let us know you were coming? I would have prepared a repast for you as well, Dorian said effusively. It's as no matter, she replied. I do not eat. The hostages here? Urtai asked impatiently. 6,000 of them, confirmed Greven. 5,988, to be exact, said Dorian. He held up several loose scrolls. I have the tallies here, if your Excellency would care to see. She ignored the proffered scrolls and walked to the mouth of the Dahl stockade. Moggs grunted and sidled away from Belby. Guards on the wall snapped to attention. Dorian, Urtai, and Greven came up behind her. What does your Excellency require? Asked the Chamberlain. A better view, first. She looked left and right, judged the far wall to be straighter, and sprang from a flat-footed stance to the top of the 7-foot-high structure. Belby looked out over the dusty arena, jammed with almost 2,000 Dahl. With designed thoroughness, she cataloged the crowd. 1,533 adults, 461 children. Most of the adults were elderly or female. She started counting crutches in the crowd and stopped when she passed 150. Distaste rose in her throat. She turned to the trio of men waiting below her. Who chose these people? She shouted. Well, I did, Excellency, with Lord Greven's help, Dorian replied. Why take these particular people? Women, children, the aged? Come down, Excellency. I'd rather not have this conversation yelled from the stockade wall, Greven said, his face hardening. She did come down, landing inches in front of the towering warrior. Explain your choices, Chamberlain. Dorian's lip trembled. The Dreadlord and I discussed it. We agreed these would make the most effective hostages. Go on. Grevin stepped up.
Our goal is to keep peace inside the stronghold. We chose people who have strong bonds with those not chosen. Men will think twice about rising against us if they know we have their mothers, fathers, wives, children in our power.
I think you erred, Commander, Dolby said. Now we're as much hostages as those people beyond the wall. Urtai spoke up. What do you mean? If any harm comes to these people, it will foment rebellion rather than quell it. He was angry, and she didn't know how to handle the emotions stirred up by the plight of the hostages. Why didn't you round up young males instead? The potential allies of Eladamri, not these helpless folk?
In matters of civil unrest, there is no innocent bystanders,
Grevin said. Be at ease, Excellency, Dorian pleaded. No one wishes harm to these people. When Lord Krovax returns triumphant, all will be well. And if Krovax loses? Asked Urtai. The silence that followed was suffocating.